So welcome everyone to our Tuesday evening meditation class. And the schedule for today, for those of you who are new, is that I give a brief introduction to meditation for those of you who are new. There are a lot of familiar faces, but also some who probably haven't meditated here before. And then we'll sit for meditation for about half an hour for a Tuesday night. And after that, I have a wisdom talk prepared for you, which is about Feng Shui today. And at the end, there's an opportunity for any questions, comments, or feedback which you might have as well. So we should wrap up by about 8:30 today. So for those of you who possibly haven't meditated here before, meditation is a method of working with a part of ourselves that we often neglect, especially as in the way we live our lives today. Often we are taken hostage by all the paraphernalia which we have in our lives, or the little devices that tend to occupy our attention, to the point that we don't have much attention left for things closer to home, like what we're doing with our lives, or how to make life more meaningful. So meditation acts as a antidote to that holding to ransom of our awareness, by allowing us to return our awareness to a place where it's more under our control, somewhere where it's closer to home, which is within the space of our body. Because if body and mind can be in the same place, at least for part of our lives, then it helps to recharge the batteries of the mind, to allow us to calm down, to have a mind that's more free of thought, to allow us to relax when we need to. I'm not saying that being attentive to the things around you is not a good thing, but you also need to have some downtime in order to restore the balance of body and mind and to recharge the batteries of the mind. And there's a place within our body where if body and mind can be brought into balance, then it is particularly effective for helping the mind to go deeper and to discover and benefit from the wisdom that already lies within us, but often we don't make much use of. And the place I'm talking about is this place down at the level of the diaphragm, at our solar plexus, where if the awareness can be at that point, the longer it is there, then the more it is able to restore the quality of the mind. The question is, when we know that the mind itself is invisible to us, it's not something that we can detect physically, how on earth can we work with it in order to get it to go where we want it to be? And the way that we traditionally work with the mind in this meditation center is by means of a visualization, which means conjuring up a picture or a feeling in the mind, which if we can bring that picture or feeling to that point that you see at the solar plexus, then the mind will follow. It's almost like an anchor for the mind. So the sort of picture you might use for this task would be something ideally bright and circular, maybe a picture of the sun shining, or a full moon, or a star, or a diamond perhaps. If you see the crystal ball behind me, you might like to use that, something clear, bright and round. You imagine that picture as if it's at the center of your body. And little by little, although it may be difficult in the beginning to hold your awareness with that picture in the beginning, but as time goes on, you become more practiced at it, it becomes easier, it becomes second nature to you. If it's a feeling, then you might feel that the presence of an object there rather than seeing it, and that will be just as effective. As for the possible problem of having thoughts in the mind, Some people have more thoughts than others. If the thoughts are at a low level, sometimes you can try ignoring any thoughts that arise, and if you do that for long enough, then like sediment in a barrel, then it will settle to the bottom as long as you stop stirring it. But if you find that that's not effective for you and you really have a lot on your mind, which just won't seem to go away, then you might make use of a slightly more intensive way of dealing with the thoughts, which is to make use of a mantra, hearing the sound of words passing through your mind, hopefully something inspiring, something uplifting for you. You may have a mantra of your own, in which case you could use that. If you don't have one, then you could try using the one that's traditional to this meditation technique, which are the Indian words Samma Arahang, which means a pure state of mind achieved in the proper way. And you would hear the sound of that, not saying it out loud, please, but hearing it as if it comes up from the center of your inner object. So far, so good. As for the sitting position, some people like to sit on the floor, but we don't have any example of such people today, unfortunately. So you're sitting on chairs, try to sit fairly upright, and with the 2 feet flat on the floor. If your feet don't reach the floor, then we have these little blue blocks which you can use to rest your feet on. It also keeps your feet warm as you're meditating. And the way to put your hands together is with your right hand on top of the left hand, and the index finger of the right hand goes up against the thumb of the left hand. And your hands just rest palm upwards in your lap. So far, so good. So we'll sit for meditation for about half an hour, and after that then we can look a little bit more at our Feng Shui. We start by settling ourselves down into a comfortable position for our meditation. Closing our eyes as gently as possible. Slowing ourselves down by breathing deeply. And taking a few moments to check down through the whole of our body. To relax each and every muscle as we go. All the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes. And relaxing all the tensions of the muscles in between. The ideal posture for our meditation is a position of poise, where the whole of our body is fairly upright, while being comfortable, almost as if there were a thread running from the top of our head all the way down through our back, almost as if we were suspended by that thread, with our body leaning slightly forwards and upwards, and extending the back. Allowing us to breathe easily, and also making it easier to find the center of our body. And inside our mind we reconnect with the best of our meditation, not with particular experiences that we've had, with what we can remember of the feeling that accompanied the best of our meditation in the past. A sense of joy or well-being. That accompanied the best of our meditation that we can remember. And if we can conjure up that feeling inside us, then it will bring us back to the same quality of mind we enjoyed last time round. And somehow it will help us to return to that same place in our meditation again, with a sense of lightness, a sense of the whole body being filled with happiness and joy. And we imagine that inside our body is just an empty space, a hollow cavity, without any organs or tissues, muscles or bones. Or alternatively, as if our whole body is like a bubble, with nothing on the inside, and with a completely transparent skin. Or perhaps as if our whole body has disappeared completely, and it's like inhabiting a space of our own creation. But whatever our experience of that inner space, we allow the focus of our attention to make its way gradually down to the center of our body. At that place at our solar plexus, which I mentioned earlier, or on the level of our diaphragm. Not just the place where we are looking with our mind's eye, but actually as if our whole awareness has moved down to that central point. As if our head has disappeared completely, and all our faculties, whether it be perception, memory, thought, or cognition, have come together at a single place at the center of ourselves. So we're actually located down at our center, in the same place as our meditation object, whatever that might be, whether it's something that we visualize or something that we feel. So rather than looking down on it from somewhere above, it's as if we are there with the object itself. For some of you already acquainted with the observation technique, it's simply a question of seeing what's already there and following that without interfering. Simply being attentive at the center. For those amongst you who are better versed in visualizing some sort of meditational object, it may be a visual object like that of a shining sun, or it might be a tactile object such as an imaginary invisible fruit, which you can feel at the center. At the point of the turning of the breath, on the same level as the diaphragm. Whatever our approach to keeping the mind on track at the center, we do so continuously with a feather-light touch, an unbroken and exceedingly gentle attention, bringing our attention back if it pivots away to any other distractions around us, or following it if there is some sort of transformation in the mind. If the thoughts are few and far between, we do our best to ignore them, certainly not letting a first thought proliferate into a second or a third. Only as a last resort, making use of a mantra if the thoughts are really too many to deal with. So we cultivate our attention in this way, lightly and gently, each to our own practice now for a few more moments in silence, until we come to the appropriate time. And we continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body as continuously as we can for as long as we can. If our mind wanders away to anything else around us, each time you realize, we just bring our attention back again to the center as before. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. If it changes, we just follow it in its new form, observing the way the inner experience evolves in the mind. If thoughts return, we do our best to ignore them. But if the thoughts are too many to simply ignore, we may make use of that traditional mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, coming out from the center of the body. And in the meantime, we continue to maintain our awareness with the very lightest of touch, a feather-light touch at the center, letting our mind settle into silence until there's nothing but the inner experience for us to follow at the center. We continue in this way for a few more moments in silence until we come to time for our loving kindness meditation. We continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, lightly, gently and continuously, always at the center of whatever inner experience we've built up for ourselves as the result of the meditation so far this evening. For some people, the inner experience will amount to a sense of brightness at the center of oneself. For others, it may be more of a feeling, something like a sense of well-being, again centered at the seventh base of the mind. For others still, it may be images, large or small, centered around the middle of our body. Sometimes small like objects, sometimes much larger like whole vistas or panoramas, where we are actually smaller than the images we see. But whatever inner experience we have, we touch our mind gently at the center. So gently that it's almost as if we are hardly touching at all. Touching with the lightness of a warm fingertip in contact with the surface of some new fallen snow. Touching the snow so gently that there'll be a melting away at the point of contact, where solid becomes liquid and liquid becomes vapor, spreading outwards, rarefying outwards and spreading like the ripples on the surface of a pond, ever wider from the point of contact. In this way, we extend our inner experience initially to the whole of ourselves, filling ourselves with the light or that sense of well-being, or expanding the inner picture to fill the whole of our body by a process known as the spreading of loving kindness. And we make the affirmation at the center of ourselves that may I be well and happy, free from all suffering. And then we extend the same loving kindness beyond the boundaries of our own body, outwards into the room around us, extending outwards in all directions like a halo or an aura, to encapsulate all the sentient beings around us in the room where we're sitting for meditation. And we start to return some of the benefits of meditation to the world around us by making the affirmation at the center of ourselves that may all the living beings here in this room be well and happy, free from suffering, and live together in peace and harmony. We spread the loving kindness further outwards now to the whole building, wider to the whole neighborhood, outwards to the whole borough, the whole county, almost as if we were extending our loving kindness across a map seen in bird's eye view, in ever-widening circles around us, taking in all the sentient beings in that area, with the wish that may all these living beings be well and happy, live in peace and harmony. Especially at this time when so many are feeling isolated or pinned down by negativity. We extend our loving kindness as a torrent of peace, a cool tide, extending outwards to bring happiness wherever there is suffering, and increasing the happiness where happiness is scarce. We extend loving kindness outwards to the whole of the southeast, whole of England, whole of Great Britain, British Isles, whole continent of Europe, with a wish that may all living beings here on this continent be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We extend our loving kindness across the face of the globe to all the continents of the world, as if we're extending loving kindness across the entire face of this planet, with the affirmation at the center of ourselves that may all living beings, whether on the land, in the air, or in the sea, be touched by our loving kindness, that these living beings be well and happy and free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony, that world peace become a reality within our own lifetimes. We can extend loving kindness in all the 6 great directions, almost as if we were extending a beam of loving kindness outwards into the universe around us, to the front and to the back without limits, to the right and to the left without boundaries, above and below without end, extending loving kindness to all living beings in the universe, so that no living being, without exception, is left untouched by our loving kindness. Again, with the same wish for all living beings to be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. And for the last few moments of our practice, we can extend the loving kindness toward particular loved ones we might be thinking about, holding them close within the brightness or our sense of well-being at the center of ourselves, thinking of their name or their face, extending loving kindness to them in particular, especially if they are separated by huge distances. And extending loving kindness for those to whom we feel a particular debt of gratitude, towards those still living or even those who have already passed, trusting that the purity of our loving kindness can extend across the huge gulfs of space and time to reach those loved ones wherever they are to be found. We extend our loving kindness in this way for the last few moments of our practice together. Sappha-buddha-nupavena, Sappha-dhamma-nupavena, Sappa Sankhanuppavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for this evening, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before slowly finishing your practice. So I hope the meditation went okay, especially for those who are new to meditation today. Yeah? Not too confused by loving kindness meditation, extending the benefits of your meditation for others. Generally, it becomes easier to spread it with practice, as with all things meditational. But if you can extend it beyond yourself, then before long you'll be able to extend it wider and wider. Yeah, becomes more flexible with practice. Over the last few weeks, we've been looking at a series of connected values and virtues within the context of Buddhism. And up until now, we've looked at 3 different ones, which some of you may have caught along the way. Things like not associating with so-called fools, associating instead with the wise, expressing respect towards those worthy of respect. And all those 3 belonged to the most basic of the teachings within what's known as the Mangala Sutta, or the blessings of life teaching in Buddhism. And the idea of those 3 that we've already studied were to do with turning our backs on any bad habits that we might have in our lives. And having turned our back on those things, we now have the chance to turn towards new and better things. And it brings us today to the second group of blessings, of which the 4th blessing is the first. It's themed turning towards good habits. And we see that the first of these is one of the rare examples of spiritual wisdom that includes the idea of the environment, which is the conducive location, or the idea of Feng Shui. Probably not pronouncing it correctly. But even Feng Shui has its roots in probably some Buddhist knowledge as well. In developmental psychology, the central discussion has always been about the relative importance of nature and nurture. Nature being our genetic component, and nurture being the influence of our environment and the people around us. So for science, it's almost always been the idea of those factors affecting things like adaptation to the environment, things like camouflage or body size, which might help with the survival of the fittest. But in terms of spiritual wisdom, when we're talking about nature and nurture, in fact, we're not so interested in survival, but more in the idea of spiritual maturity. Yeah? Maturing spiritually, cultivating spirituality. So the 4th blessing, which we're going to make a start on today, is the first of the second group of blessings. Comes in at number 4 in the 38 blessings. And it is the thing which is up front in turning towards wholesomeness or good habits in life. And the nurture part is very much connected with our environment, but as we shall see, it's not just the sort of trees and the forests, but it includes many aspects, including the people in our environment as well. After that, we'll go on to look at more of the nature aspects, what we bring to the table personally, which is to do with the dispositions which we have cultivated for ourselves in the past. In other words, the store of merits in our past. And the last of the second group of blessings is going to be to do with how good we are at having a clear idea of where we are aiming for, or our sense of purpose in life, having a clear direction. Yeah, so 3 things which we'll be looking at over the course of the next few weeks. But today we're going to start with the conducive location part, at least half of it. And it's said that rather like a bonsai tree, which if it was planted in the right place could become a full-size tree, bonsai tree. But if you put it in a place where its roots are very cramped and limited, then it will only ever grow to this size. And in the same way with spirituality, if we don't find ourselves in a conducive environment, then no matter how hard we might try, we can't grow to our full maturity. This is the idea of taking into account the idea of location, or especially conducive location, in considering the things that may help or hinder our spiritual progress. Yeah? So, we know that location is important. And if there are any real estate agents here, then you probably will be familiar with the idea of nothing exceeding location in importance. Location, 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 the 3 most important things about any property you might buy. But location, for different purposes, of course, has different things which it emphasizes. If you are trying to catch fish, then of course the sort of location you'll be looking for is maybe the place which is closest to the fish breeding grounds. Maybe somewhere on the coast, or maybe out in the sea. If you're in business, then it might not be the sea you're interested in. It might be more like a lively marketplace where you've got plenty of potential customers walking past your shop window. And if you're a monk, well, maybe you don't want the hustle and bustle of the marketplace. That wouldn't be very good for a temple, right? You need to sort of extract yourself to a reasonable distance, to a place where you have peace and quiet, enough to meditate, but not so far away in a forest somewhere that no one can be bothered to visit you anymore. So you'd be maybe on the suburbs somewhere. If you are a soldier, then your whole idea of location might be to do with strategy. You want to be on the high ground, for example. So location can be applied in different ways depending on what you are interested in cultivating, what you're interested in succeeding at. And sometimes you might consider location in terms of the big picture, the macrocosm, the climate of a country, the connections a country has with its neighboring countries. Or you might bring it right down to the microcosm, where even if you are sitting on one side of the table rather than another, it might make a slight difference to the effectiveness of whatever you happen to be doing. For example, if you're sitting facing the door, you know who's going to come in, rather than having your back to the door. It makes a difference. Yeah? So you can consider it in terms of the macrocosm or in terms of microcosm. All these things are considered important if you are really getting down into the details of conducive location. So, why do I call it Feng Shui? Yeah, correct me if the pronunciation is bad. Okay. Feng Shui actually is an idea of geomancy, so sort of being able to make predictions based on location or geography, which comes from the Orient. And as you can see from the background of this picture, it's very, very complicated. Can be. For example, if you are going to set up a new building, then you might get an expert in to tell you if it's facing in the right direction, or how you've laid out the rooms in your building in order to get the maximum of effectiveness or success in your life. It wasn't very well known in the West, but apparently when Richard Nixon visited China in 1972, these sort of ideas started to be communicated more to the West. And if you go and look for Feng Shui in your local bookshop or whatever, then you find lots of ideas for decorating rooms in order to maximize the flow of energy, etc., etc. Things like not leaving your lucite up. Yeah? Yeah, and sometimes it's not very clear what exactly is trying to achieve. But from our point of view, from a more Buddhist point of view, we're not just talking about general energy, but we're talking more about cultivating wisdom. What sort of environment would be really good for you to cultivate wisdom in your life towards enlightenment of some sort, in order to fill in the gaps in your spiritual knowledge. Some people, rather like the bonsai tree, may have a very high IQ, they might have a lot of potential, capability, but if they're put in the wrong environment, like some person with a doctorate who's stranded on a desert island somewhere, then they wouldn't be able to make full use of what they know or be able to extend their knowledge. However, if you, even with little knowledge, but put in a good environment, you could make huge strides in your life for the better. So this is the idea of considering why the location is important. And within the context we're looking at today, there are 4 factors of a conducive environment which we are particularly interested in from the point of view of cultivating spiritual knowledge. Are you interested to know what they are? Well, they are conducive location, but not just location, location, location. Also conducive food or food supply, conducive neighbors, so that's the human element, and also having teachings or Dharma available in that environment. So even in some economically prosperous countries, so think about G5 or G8 countries, G20, normally you would consider them successful countries because they are economically successful. But what you might not have found if you look deeper is that some of those countries, although they may be economically quite lively, but spiritually speaking or in terms of wisdom, they may be lacking. Because it's not all just about the economy. It's not all about the material things. Often, the more materially oriented a country or an economy is, the more it neglects the spiritual aspects. So what we're looking at here is the aspect of the spiritual knowledge as well. Not saying that economics is not important, because of course food and sometimes social justice and that sort of thing depends on the economy too. But from the point of view of cultivating wisdom, then there needs to be something more than just everyone making a fast buck. I'm not saying that being employed or being able to be socially mobile is a bad thing. All of those things help to sustain the opportunities for spiritual growth as well, but it's not the whole story. So this is why we need to look at all 4, so that there's also the opportunity to cultivate spiritual values, spiritual abundance in life. Otherwise, you might be in quite a materially prosperous country, but you may be none the wiser spiritually speaking. So what we're going to do is go through each of these 4 factors and see On the national level, on the local level, on a neighborhood level, and on a household level, what those factors might mean in a way that hopefully might be useful to you if you ever are in the position that you're trying to choose a place that is conducive to your cultivation of spiritual values. So the first we'll start with is that of location. So on a national level, location, which is conducive, might mean a conducive climate, not too hot, not too cold. It might mean that a landscape is not too rugged. If you are building your house in water meadows somewhere, then they might be liable to flooding, so that probably isn't a great idea. And also the place you're in, if it has convenient connections with the rest of the world, then that's also a plus. This is on the top level, national sort of level. Some countries, for example, they don't have a seaboard. Hard to imagine for people living on an island, perhaps, but some countries don't have any seaports, right? And all their trade has to go through a second country, which is particularly difficult for people in that country, which is sort of isolated somehow by that. Okay, going down to the local level, things like unemployment, social infrastructure, and things like having clean water on tap. It's not things that you can assume you're going to have everywhere. We're lucky, but in some places that might not be quite so convenient. Coming down to the neighborhood level, it might be down to things like traffic, road system, good communications, do you have broadband? And again, things like flooding. Yeah? Coming down from the neighborhood level down to the individual level of your own home, which is maybe where you have a little bit more influence yourself. Things that make for a conducive household are maybe a well-planned house, good ventilation, maybe trees giving shade around your home, have the availability of parks nearby, no disturbance from noise. Probably these days you'd have to think of things like the quality of the air. And if it's a temple, then a conducive temple, it would need to be sufficiently spacious to be able to have all the activities that you wish to hold in it. Location. Next, food. So let's go to the food one. On a national level, conducive food might mean a country being self-sufficient in the food it needs. Is Britain self-sufficient in its food? How much they import from Europe? We tend to become slightly more aware of that these days. If you just want to eat potatoes the whole time. But some countries have to import everything. Think about the countries in the Middle East, for example. If you live in a desert, then you need to import all your food, which adds to the cost of even the basic necessities for people who live there. On a local level, then you might be down to things like the availability of home produce, markets nearby. Some places get flooded, so the food can't get through. But if people have grown their own food, maybe they have cottage gardens, then they can survive off their home produce for maybe a whole month before food supplies make it through again, which has got to be an advantage, right? And some places they only plant cash crops, which means that they can't eat any of the things they've actually gone to the trouble of planting. If they're growing coffee, for example, or maize, then you can't eat that. It's not for sort of human consumption. So sometimes having things which you can eat, a little sort of garden at the back of your house where you've grown sort of basic vegetables can be really helpful at a pinch. On the neighborhood level, it might mean a fresh food market nearby where you live. And on the household level, okay, you might have stocked up your house with lots of food, but having a good cook in the house also adds to the amenability or conduciveness of the food in your house, because even with the best raw materials, if no one knows how to cook, then your whole food menu will be a disaster. You have great things in this country like the Great British Bake Off to encourage people to learn how to make simple food more professionally. Yeah, I don't think any other country has that, so it's something to be proud of. There's a tradition for at least making cakes well. And if you don't know how to cook, some people have got lots of excuses about this. They've got evening classes and this sort of thing. At least there ought to be at least one thing you can cook well for everybody. And it's the sort of thing that you ought to teach your children to do as well, in order to make your home a little bit more amenable on the food front. Neighbors or personnel, are they conducive? Well, this is maybe one factor that no one really thinks about when they are thinking of the environment, but certainly the human environment is particularly important from the point of view of spiritual wisdom, because on a national level, if you have the wrong sort of people dominating the country and the sense of justice in that country, then you are in big trouble. Even if you try to be decent and honest, then you get punished for it if you are with the wrong sort of people, or if the wrong sort of people prevail in your country. So, in fact, the quality of the neighbors you have, or the fellow country people and their values that they have, is particularly important from the point of view of spiritual cultivation. So on a national level, often the idea of right livelihood is particularly important. Are you familiar with this concept? Right livelihood? People earning their living. Many people just think as long as you get a good income, then that's fine. But if you get a good income from selling things which are maybe taking advantage of your customers, selling things like drugs, for example, or weapons, although you might make lots of money, but the repercussions of the things that you sell to your clients is going to destroy the fabric of the society that you live in. So that's known as wrong livelihood, just to give two examples there. So if there's a prevalence of things like gangs or terrorists or extortionists, then it threatens the very fabric of that society, just because of the people who share your society. So your neighbors, in other words. On the local level, then you might think about materialistic values. Have they displaced any spiritual values in your society? Some societies are more spiritual than others, and it may not necessarily be the richer ones that have the better spiritual values. Neighborhood level, it would come down to things like whether you have people in your society who are willing to go out of their way to help the others around them, or who are qualified to help those around them. I'm thinking particularly of, let's say, people with medical knowledge, where without such people, then any small illness that you have would end up being fatal. Yeah? But having doctors and nurses around in society, it just improves the whole quality of that society for everybody. Not just that, but also you need people in society who are willing to invest in their fellows in order to help that society to move to a better level. So-called benefactors or patrons in society are also, the very presence of people like that will upgrade or allow the quality of that society to upgrade itself. And there's a story I'd like to tell about something from the time of the Buddha, where there was a plan where they were going to establish a new city. And this came at a time in ancient India where the whole of society was moving from an agrarian society where people were basically living from hand to mouth, living off the harvest and, trying to sustain themselves from year to year, moving to a more mercantile society where people are starting to stock up on things and trade with one another. And because of this ability to trade, then society suddenly had a lot more possibilities, including being able to support a whole community of monks, for example, in their society. So it became much more interesting from the point of view of spiritual knowledge. And at this time, there was a king in India, and he had plenty of builders and planners, and he wanted to create a new city. And the city which he wanted to build in the Buddhist scripture is called Saket. These days it's known as Ayodhya in India. And the city that was planned to build looks something like this. This is a model of it from one of the Jain temples. But it goes back to the time of 2,000 years ago. So you can imagine to build a huge city like this was quite an ambitious plan. So you might have the planners, you might have the builders, but without someone to invest in this, to put out the money, to make it happen, then it could never come to fruition. So at that time, the king involved, he didn't have the money himself, he just had the wish to do this. He had to borrow investors from a city that had already established itself. And in this particular case, the lady who we met up with, called Visakha, who was a great supporter of the Buddha, actually moved, her father was moved as the investor for the new city, almost like a banker. Almost like a banker. And because of that, then the city could be established successfully. But without a person like that willing to invest in strangers, basically, in a new city, then that could never come to fruition. So doctors, investors, who else is necessary? Well, also wise ones, who we've met already in blessing number 2, are important to have. Because without people to share the spiritual knowledge, then where is the knowledge going to come from? It doesn't just fall out of the sky. It doesn't just come as part of the government policy. You need someone who has the knowledge to be able to share it. So we have medical, investment, wisdom, in order to make the place somewhere that is conducive for spiritual learning and spiritual wisdom. And lastly, apart from that, then there are things to do with governance. If you get the wrong person ruling the roost in that country, also down to people, right? The people on the top need to have certain basic qualities, character, moral fiber, in order to be able to lead a country in a way that will lead to spiritual values being well established. If you get someone like a dictator running the country, then that's also a person, right? Because of their values, then no matter how great or well-meaning everyone else in the country might be, but it will be very hard for them to prosper if at the top then you have someone setting a bad example. So whether it's a monarch, or whether it's a president, or a prime minister, or a ruling party, those people have a particular responsibility to show a good example to others in order to be worth the salt of the position they're in and the influential position that they are in order for that country to be conducive in terms of personnel for spiritual values to take hold. Last but not least, we come to the idea of Dharma. Dharma you probably have heard of. The monk's supposed to give a Dharma talk, so it must be something to do with like spiritual wisdom, right? And you would be right in thinking that. Sometimes we hear in Buddhism, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. It's what the Buddha taught. So maybe it's like his teachings, maybe it's what's in the scriptures, but in actual fact it's much more than that. This word it's difficult to translate in any one particular way, because not only does it mean wisdom, but it also means what is natural. It also means what is virtuous. It also means what is just. It has all those different meanings. And this is helpful for us when we're thinking about what this word might mean on a national level, because it means the sort of ethos of that whole country, the values of the whole country, even down to the system of justice in that country, what is used to judge what is right or wrong on a national level. Yeah? On a local level, it might come down to things like the education system. What are the values which are being taught to the children in that place? Are you just teaching them to become little materialists, or are you teaching them something more than that? The neighborhood level, for children, of course, good schools are important, and we all know about like getting into the right postcode in order that our little children go to the right school. That's important. Even Buddhism would agree with that. But for adults, schools might not be so important, but if you think about lifelong learning, then how can you continue to learn as an adult in order to become spiritually more mature, no matter what age you are? Because you should continue to learn throughout your life. So what opportunities for that are available in your neighborhood, even as an adult? So don't just think of the children, also think about yourself. And the idea of spiritual knowledge is that you're particularly lucky because you've got a temple and meditation center within reach of your home. It should be a selling point for your home. And last but not least, in the family, you might think about the ethos of cultivating virtue, spiritual wisdom, even on the household level. Some households may be more conducive than others. Have you ever thought about what sort of things might make a difference? What might make a difference to whether your children pick up more spiritual values in your home or not? Any ideas? Not many? Okay, to give an example, if the whole family eats together, then there's more chance to sort of discuss or have a sense of cohesiveness in the family, and the adults get to share with their children more than if everyone's off in their own room having a TV dinner or whatever the equivalent is these days. A Netflix dinner or something. Each on their own different channel, and no one's, it's like they're just four people living under the same roof, but they don't speak to each other anymore. So the sharing of wisdom doesn't happen. Yeah? Spiritual knowledge is particularly important because there's an expression in many traditions of Buddhism that we are here in this world, but if we're not careful, we may leave this world empty-handed. And you think what this might mean? We're here, we're human beings, but if we're not careful, we might leave this world empty-handed. What do you think that means? Rather severe picture there. But this is actually from Tibetan tradition, a book called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's the best example I could find, I'm afraid. But if people live life and they go through life in a confused sort of way, thinking that life is about nothing more than the survival of the species, then even if they are close to sources of spiritual knowledge, they might never get around to learning any of that knowledge. They may never have the chance to cultivate good things in their lives, the sort of things they can be proud of their life for. And in the end, when they die, they might die as a person who's very afraid and lonely, because they haven't benefited spiritually from their time they spent in this world. That would be what this particular picture, Padmasambhava, or even the Buddha himself would say, that we have to be very careful of going through life and not picking up anything that we can take with us when we go. So we have to avoid leaving this world empty-handed by cultivating the maximum of spiritual virtues that will actually stay with us even as we leave this world. So, I've gone on a bit today, but I'll leave you with a little story about how being in a conducive place can affect the destiny not just of human beings, but even of humble animals. And in this particular case, it's a story about bats. Not cricket bats, like the bats that fly around. Flying mice, basically, rats. And there's a story which comes from about the 14th century. So it's when one of the Buddhist commentaries, a place called the Saddhamma Sangaha, or Wakuli Watu. And we come back to a place, the place we saw in the model just now, called Ayodhya. And there was a monk who lived there called Dhammakaya, who wrote down this chronicle. And he tells us that in the time not of this Buddha, but of the Buddha before that, you are aware there have been many Buddhas? You don't look very aware? Is it rather late for you? You know there have been many Buddhas? Not just the one? You don't look convinced? The most recent Buddha is one of a long line of Buddhas extending back into the infinite past. But it's only, there's a long time between each of them, but in our era it's said that there are 5 Buddhas, of which the Buddha we know is the 4th, okay? And there's one more to come. But we're going back to number 3, okay? The previous Buddha, the one before the present one. Yeah? You follow? Okay. So, during that time, there was a monk, and he lived in a cave. He'd gone off into seclusion in order to train himself more in meditation. And part of his daily routine was he would get up every morning very early, and he would do some chanting. And the chanting he would chant was some chanting called the Abhidhamma, which normally these days we use for funerals, okay? But it's a very technical sort of chanting, which is all to do with the nature of the mind and how the mind works and this sort of thing in a very succinct way. And normally he would chant it not in English, not in Indian language, but in the Pali language of the scriptures, very ancient language, rather like Sanskrit. And in his cave, he was not alone, but he shared it with a lot of bats. That in the nighttime, they'd all go off and fly around and eat things, and during the day, they'd all come and hang upside down in his cave, which was just the time when he was doing his chanting. They would come back from their foraging, and they'd be hanging upside down trying to get to sleep. And instead of getting to sleep, they'd listen to his chanting. And if they were bats, do you think they could understand what he's chanting? No. But they got the gist of it, okay? Or maybe it sounded nice to them, okay? So it turned out that even though they were bats, and bats are generally not that smart, okay? But the last thing on their mind, and there were 500 of them before they died, was this pleasant sound of the chanting. So they died with this pleasant state of mind from listening to the chanting that the monk was doing. And when they passed away, all 500 of them went into the heaven realms. And in Buddhism, heaven realms isn't the end of the story, okay? Okay, you got some nods there. So after their little sojourn in heaven realms, then they came back to the human realm again. And this time they became human beings. And because they had still the same sort of affinity for the chanting, they decided, all 500 of them, to become monks. So this big group of young men became monks, and when they became monks, during their ordination, they got to hear that same chanting again. But this time, because they're human beings, it made much more sense to them. And hearing this chanting only the once, they were able to, it brought back the memory of understanding and being impressed by this in the past, and it inspired them to become enlightened in that lifetime. Just by hearing the words of the same chanting, which reminded them of something they'd heard in a distant lifetime. And they were able to become enlightened. So just by being bats in the right place at the right time, in the presence of a monk who did some chanting, he transformed their whole location into a conducive location that meant 2 lifetimes further down the road, they were able to leave the world not empty-handed, but in order to become enlightened as monks. Yeah? So for today, I will leave it there, except for doing a little bit of publicity, saying that apart from this Tuesday evening class, we also have a Thursday evening class, which has a little bit of a longer meditation. This Thursday, if you want to attend, please be warned that we have another visitation of cubs, but we are going to relocate our class to the White Room so that the cubs can have the run of the temple, and we won't have our normal teachings disturbed by their activities. Because last time we tried to do 2 in 1 and it didn't work out that successfully, at least for the class. Apart from that, we have an online class every Saturday, which you can follow by Zoom, which is between 7 and 8 p.m. in English. And that's followed by people all over Europe. And our next full moon, for those of you who liked the last one, will be on the 18th of December, so the full moon again. And the theme this time will be family harmony in the holiday season, for those of you who have to put special effort into being in close contact with all your loved ones for long periods of time over the festive season. Apart from that, for those of you who may be new to meditation today and who would like to take it away and practice it more regularly at home, there is an app for that which will help you to be able to follow meditation instruction, which you can download for free onto your cell phone, either iOS or Android, and you can time your meditations and listen to instruction for meditation from different teaching monks on that. It's called Mind Gem, and it's a good way to encourage yourself to meditate regularly, even though we have classes here only once or twice a week. So yes, if you like to meditate at home, that's a good way to keep yourself in the habit. For today, that's all I planned to share with you, but if there are any questions or comments at this point, then please feel free to put up your hand and ask. Yes, John? No? Or maybe you'd like to close the session?
Well, I'd like to say thank you very much for the teaching and meditation. And please pay respect to our teaching monks and families.
So may all of you be blessed with happiness, prosperity, and fulfillment in life. May all your locations in your life be conducive to formation of spiritual wisdom now and forevermore. The next other half of this session I will continue with next, not this Thursday, but the Thursday afterwards. And what I'll talk about more is not just choosing a good location, but actually transforming the location you already have into a more amenable or conducive location for spiritual wisdom. Yes.
Pay respect to our Lord Buddha, our Dharma 3 times.